morning, everybody. Good morning. Good morning.
Hello, everybody. Boker Tov.
Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Review. I'm Rachel Scheinerman, and I'm delighted to welcome you to my Jewish Learning's Daf Yomi Week in Review, Thursday morning, March 2nd, late tractate Nazir, and we are joined this morning by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Rabbi Goldberg, go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Well, for me, it's good morning. I have to remember that. Good, whatever time of day it is by you. We'll try to be inclusive in that way. If you like, if you're enjoying Tractate Nazir, this week we spent a lot of time in chapter 5, which deals with things the Nazir can't do, and involves lots of conversations about limits and quantities. And I thought that my colleagues from the Daily Dose columns did a great job pulling out the key concepts from that. I encourage you to read them if you're really into chapter 5. I had a blast with the end of chapter 4, which we just we got to just at the beginning of this week. We ended chapter 4, and I want to spend a little time there with us today. I'm going to bring two cases that come from the same Mishnah, which I'll give you a header to think about as we go through the text. It appears that the rabbis are drawing parallels between the two cases. There's a first case and there's a second case that builds on it. And the two cases have a lot that are similar that make them worthy of being compared one to the other. But this is the but is what I want you to look for as we're looking at the text. I want us to think about what's different about the second case that means maybe it's not exactly the same thing as the first case and we need to deal with it a little differently. Does that make sense? I'll say that one more time. We're going to look at two cases. The rabbis seem to be saying they're parallel. They're similar enough that we could draw the same conclusions about them. But this rabbi anyway says, I think they're different and might need different, there's something different about them that might be more relevant that the rabbis of the Mishnah have to say. When we're done with the Mishnah cases, we're going to look at what the rabbis of the Gemara do, because I think while I'm disagreeing with the Mishnah a little bit today, I think the rabbis in the Gemara did too. So I have some ancient colleagues to stand on today. Anyways, that's the introduction. It's nice to see all you guys. I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. You would think it's all these years into Zoom, I would have it all down. All right, sorry. There we go. Couldn't find the right window, but there it is. Pardon the technological slowness. All right. And here we go. So the Mishnah brings the following case. With regard to one who took a vow of Nazariteship and went to bring their animal, which they set aside for the Nazarite offering and discovered that it was stolen, ... We'll get to the ... in a minute. Let me just clarify what's here. Someone took a vow to become a Nazir. And as they did that, they designated a particular animal to be part of their sacrifice that they had to make at the end. And so they do their Nazariteship and they go to get their animal to go to the temple to make the sacrifice. And what happens? Lo and behold, the animal that they had designated was stolen. It's not there anymore. And the Mishnah says the following two things. So if they took a vow of Nazariteship before their animal was stolen, they are Nazarite. But if they took a vow of Nazariteship after the animal was stolen, they're not a Nazarite. So two possible outcomes, right? If depending on the time of the theft of the animal, the time of the theft of the animal has implication for the vow that they took. Now, there are some things that are not listed in the Mishnah that help us understand this a little bit. If the person went to get their animal and they discovered it was stolen and they have no problem whatsoever with being a Nazirite and replacing the stolen animal with a new animal for sacrifice, then their Naziriteship is intact and they could just sacrifice a different animal instead, because the one they intended to sacrifice, they don't have anymore. The case the Mishnah is really talking about is what happens if, because of the stolen animal, the person says, "Oh, I wish I wasn't a Nazirite." Right? So they want to get out of their Nazirite vow. So this will echo back to our reading of Masechet Nidarim. What we learned there was, right, if there are dependent, when circumstances change, when your vow was made under pretenses that under certain conditions that you were unaware of, sometimes you can get out of a vow. So here's a person who becomes a Nazirite. They designate an animal for sacrifice. The animal is stolen, and they decide, "Oh, I wish I wasn't a Nazirite, because now I have to bring a new animal, which I don't want to bring." I guess animals are expensive now. Animals were really expensive then. It was a valuable thing to sacrifice and to give up, to sacrifice an animal in the temple. So the person wants out of their Nazirite vow. And what do the rabbis in the Mishnah tell us? Well, it depends when the theft of the animal happened. If the animal was stolen before the Nazirite vow was taken, then the Nazirite vow doesn't take hold, because it was taken with the assumption that the person owned an animal that they were going to sacrifice, which they no longer owned because it had been stolen. But if they make the vow and a subsequent event happens and their animal is stolen after they if their animal was stolen after they make the vow, their vow still holds and they are a Nazirite, and they do have to replace that animal and make a sacrifice. So that's case number one. Case number two, similar but different. And the question is, what is different here about this? Because the Mishnah is going to hint that there's a mistake coming. The Mishnah says, and this was the error that Nachum of Mead erred. Nachum of Mead was a rabbi from the early generations. The temple still stood when he lived during the time, well, you'll see, when the end of the Second Temple period. But the rabbis say he made a mistake about the Mishnah that we just read. But there's a new case here, a little bit of a story. It's told in narrative form, but similar, but let's think about how it's a different case. So here's what happened. When Nazirites were ascending from exile to sacrifice their offerings. So some Nazirites had become Nazirites. They happened to take their vows outside the land of Israel. They come to the land of Israel at the end of the period of their vow because they have to make a sacrifice in the temple. And when they got to Jerusalem, they found that the temple had been destroyed. Right? News didn't travel. There was no CNN in those days. News took a long time to travel. When these Nazirites made their vow, and when they then went to the temple, they weren't aware that it had been destroyed. Possibly, now that I think about it historically, they maybe weren't aware that the Romans had laid siege to it, but the siege was quite long. So somehow they thought they were going to get through the siege and be able to sacrifice before the destruction of the temple. But anyways, they get to the temple. They're there to make their sacrifices, but the temple has been destroyed. It's not there anymore. And Nachum of Mead says to them, "Hey, if you had known that the temple would be destroyed, would you have taken your vow of Naziriteship?" And they said to him, "No." And Nachum of Mead dissolved the vow for them. So what happens here? They get to the temple. There is no temple. Nachum of Mead sees them and asks a question that in the form that the rabbi sometimes asks to try to get someone out of a vow. If you had known that the temple had been destroyed, would you have taken a vow of Naziriteship? And they say no. If we had thought that there would be no temple and there would be no way for us to end our Nazirites period, we would not have become Nazirites. And so he releases them from their vow. One more thing. But when this matter came before the rabbis, they said, whoever took a vow of Nazariteship before the temple was destroyed, that person's Nazarite. However, one who stated his vow after the temple was destroyed is not a Nazarite. So the rabbis here apply the same logic about the stolen animal. If when you made your Nazarite vow, the temple still stood, your vow holds and you are a Nazarite. But if the vow was after the temple was destroyed, then you're not a Nazarite. So the rabbis are saying Nachum of Mead made a mistake because he released everyone from their vow without inquiring the timing of when their vow was made. And the rabbis are saying, unlike Nachum of Mead, the law here should be the same as the law is for the stolen animal, meaning if the temple was gone when you made your vow, the conditions that existed when you made your vow no longer exist. The conditions based upon what you thought were happening when you made your vow don't exist, right? I think there's a temple. I make a vow to be a Nazarite, but really the temple has already been destroyed, so that vow is not a legitimate vow. But if I make a vow and there is a temple, which I think there is, but then later after I made the vow, it's destroyed. That vow doesn't hold. The vow does hold, and it can't be annulled. Now, I tried to do some research, and it came up empty. What does it mean for someone to be a Nazarite and the temple is destroyed and you can't do your vows? You can't do the sacrifice that end the Nazariteship. Some of my assumption here from reading these texts is that you'd be stuck being a Nazarite forever since you can't end your Nazarite period. With the sacrifices that you need to do, which are the rituals that end your term as a Nazariteship. And if that's in fact the case, that's a pretty severe place to be stuck. All right, there's going to be a little more text, but I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute so I can see more of you. So, and I'm going to open up my chat here to see. And I'm seeing the comments starting to come in. So I want to let's see. What do you guys think? Is my contention is that case 2 is different than case 1, even though the rabbis are relying on it. I happen to side more with our friend from Mead, who releases them. So, what do you think? The question to think about was, what's different between these two cases? Do you have some ideas about why maybe case 2 isn't a good precedent for case 1? Think a little bit, put it in the chat. Oh, Rachel, Rachel, sorry, if you're saying something.
Sorry, I muted myself out of politeness. While we're letting people think, do you think you could perhaps, Rabbi Goldberg, stick the link to your sources in the chat in case people want to scroll back up and look at the first case again?
I will gladly.
Sometimes it's helpful to see these things over again.
Yes, I will gladly do that. I usually do that at the beginning. I forgot. Thank you for that. I'm pulling that up right now. Copying the link. And we'll make this, anyone with the link can see it.
Yeah. And you are starting to get answers in the meanwhile to your question.
All right, awesome.
Mostly along the lines of an animal is much more replaceable than a temple.
Oh, yes. All right. There you go. I see. All right, so I put the link in. I see a lot of.
See it in the chat.
I see some things. You don't see it in the chat?
I don't see it in the chat. Am I the only one?
No, I sent it just to one person by accident.
Ah, okay. One lucky person gets to see it.
Zoom mornings. There you go. Now I sent
it.
Okay, so I see a few things, and I'm gonna echoing themselves. So I'm gonna go with. I think Charles Shapiro said it very succinctly and nicely. Case 1 is fixable. Case 2 is not. Right? In case 1, your animal was stolen, and if your on the hook for the Nazarite sacrifices. It might be an economic loss, but you can bring another animal. In case 2, the temple is destroyed. That's not as easy to replace. In fact, right, we're dealing with the second temple here. I guess, if we were dealing with the first temple period case and these Nazarites were very young, it's possible they could be Nazarites for 70 years or so and then bring sacrifices at the second temple, although that's unlikely. But right, the second, if this is a second temple story, and right, it not only do we think it's not fixable, right? It's 2 millennia later. There's no temple, right? There was no way for these Nazarites to go. So there's a big difference between these two cases. The first one is fixable. The second one is not. Some people I see in the chat have asked questions. Well, what happens to these Nazarites, right? What happens? They have this vow. If it's effective and the temple's destroyed and you can't bring the sacrifices, my sense is the implication here from the text is if there's not some remedy, if you can't end your Nazariteship with the rituals, you are a Nazarite for life. We know there are rules for what it means to be a Nazarite for life, because people are allowed to make a vow to be a Nazarite for life. But what the rabbis are saying here is if you make a vow and then something after your vow is made happens that changes what the world looks like, that affects your vow, that's not a good enough reason to nullify the vow. And the rabbis in the Mishnah are saying that's just how it is. This subset of Nazarites who made their vow in a very small window, when the vow happened and their period started, the temple existed. But by the time they went to end their period, the temple was gone. Those Nazarites are stuck. Now, Nahum Amid, I have some, I think I have a lot of sympathy for what he did. And while the Mishnah says he erred in his judgment, I'm not so sure that I agree with that, based on what some of you are saying in the chat and what I've intimated here about this text as well. Here are these Nazarites, they made a vow. Yes, technically speaking, based on the rules of the Mishnah, since the destruction of the temple was post their vow, it shouldn't, right? According to this rule in this Mishnah, the destruction of the temple does not affect their vow. But I'm really drawn to this. There's no way to fix it. The temple's gone. It's not like you just have to find another sheep. The temple's gone. And can you guys hear me okay? I see my videos looping. I got a thumbs up from people if you can hear me. All right, I got a thumbs up. Sorry. I'm having a weird video thing going on. All right, I'm back.
You're back.
But the temple's gone. And it strikes me, for the rabbis especially, and the rabbis of the Mishnah especially, who are keenly aware that the temple changed everything. You would think the destruction of the temple should change this too. Right. In fact, right, part of what the Mishnah is about that leads to all this conversation in the Gemara and all these texts that we're studying in Daf Yomi is about, in part, what sustained us was the temple and the temple rituals, and we no longer have that, and Judaism has to change. And in part, the Mishnah is a work that describes what Judaism looks like in the post-temple era. And there are lots of things that, while there are lots of parts of the Mishnah that record for us what used to happen in the temple, because the rabbis hoped for a return to the temple. At the same time, there's plenty that says, here's what we used to do and here's what we do now. And it seems to me, in this case also, if the temple was destroyed and you were in the middle of the Nazarite period, regardless of the particularities of the laws of vows and Nazariteship, it would strike me that Nahum Amid is on good ground to say, this is twice in the history of our people tragedy, and we ought to make adjustments so that people who were Nazarites didn't get stuck. The Mishnah doesn't do that, though. They say Nachum of Mid is wrong, but our friends in the Gemara don't leave it there, and they seem to think a little bit like me. So I'm going to bring back, and I want to show you two of the things that they say. All right, I'm done sharing. I'm going to go back to my slideshow. Here we go. Two options. And I made them a little shorter than they are in the Gemara. One of the rabbis, the Gemara Rava says, well, okay, technically speaking, right, the order of events matters. But I have a question that I could ask. That could help them get out of these Nazarites get out of their vows. And here's what Rava said he would ask them. If a person had come to you and said to you before you took your vow that the temple would be destroyed, would you have still made your vow? And if the people say, no, we wouldn't have made our vow because then we'd be stuck being Nazarites forever, then Rava argues, if they say no to this question, that's a reason why I can release them from their vow of Nazariteship, right, and nullify it retroactively because, right, I'm no longer dealing with the order of events, right, and the timing, but something happened and okay, we can't deal with the order of events, but if you had known when you made your vow that this would be the case when your vow ended, would you still have done it? If they say no, that's enough, says Rava, to make such a change. And Rav Yosef goes a little more cryptic, but maybe does one better than Rava. He says, if I had been there when these Nazarites arrived, I would have said the following to them. Isn't it written? The sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord are these. Jeremiah 7:4. The key piece of this verse that he's quoting, well, first is right the repetition of the sanctuary of the Lord, the temple 3 times. But the key here is that it's 3 times. The first reference, says Rav Yosef, is to the first temple, which was destroyed and replaced by the second temple. And the second, the second reference is to the second temple, which was destroyed during the Nazarite period of these folks. And then the third reference is the third temple, which is yet to be built. And Rav Yosef reminds them of this verse. And if the Nazarites, right, are aware, isn't it written that the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord? If the Nazarites are aware of this verse in Jeremiah 7:4, actually, we don't need to ask them Rava's question. Because what does this verse tell us? This verse tells us there are going to be 3 temples. So in some ways, these rabbis, Jeremiah serves to be the person who came to these people and tells them there's a possibility, there are going to be multiple temples. And so there's an awareness of the possibility that the temple could be destroyed. And if that awareness was in their mind when they made the Nazarite vow, that, their vow is contingent on the temple still standing and us not moving to the period between the second and third temples, then the vow can be voided just based on their knowledge of this verse and the way it impacts their mental state when they had the vow. So a little more cryptic there, but right, Rava's piece is easier. Imagine when you made the vow. If someone told you there wouldn't be a temple when you ended your vow, would you still have made it? That helps them. That helps the rabbinic authority nullify their vow. And Rav Yosef says, well, I got a verse for you that makes it so everyone has sort of had this warning, and we can just assume that was in it. And in some ways, these two positions in the Gemara, they don't exactly side with Nachum of Mid to say, I could just release you from your vow just because. But they also don't side with the rabbis who say these Nazarites are stuck. They find ways to circumvent this Mishnah by asking creative questions of the Nazarites to get them out of their vows. So Aaron Boxer asks a great question. I see. Why can't we just do this in the case of the stolen animal. If when you made your vow, you knew your animal would be stolen, that, would you have made your vow? If the person says yes, we can let them out of the vow. So, Aaron, that's a Gemara Cup question, right? That's from Gemara Thinking. I love that question. The Gemara doesn't come back to this. And so that leaves me with two possible answers, which is also very Talmudic. One is, well, if the rabbis and the Mishnah are drawing parallel between these two cases, if there's a remedy for the Nazarites when the temple was destroyed, there's a remedy for the Nazarites whose animals were stolen, and you can't. Or if we go back to what Charles said earlier, you could say these cases are different. Why? Because in the case of the stolen animal, the animal can be replaced, and in the case of the destroyed temple, the temple cannot be replaced. And since the Gemara doesn't go one way or the other here, you get to pick which of those seem to be the Talmudic logic that you would like to follow. Although, as someone asked and someone else answered in the chat earlier, all of this in terms of the Nazarite part is moot because with the destruction of the temple, Nazariteship went away. And so this is because you need the temple to get out of Nazarite, right? The Nazarite rituals were not things that the rabbis found ways to preserve for us in the post-temple era. Quite possibly because they weren't so fond of us making vows anyways, but also because so much was needed in the temple to release the Nazarites from their vow. So that's what I got for today. I thank you for all those interesting comments in the chat. I love that you guys saw some of the parallels here that I found too, and I hope
You've got one question, Rabbi Goldberg, if you're willing to.
Yeah, I'm willing.
If you stick on for 2 minutes.
Sure.
Okay, Carol.
Thank you, Rabbi, for this amazing lesson. And I have a question based on what you said about the rabbis trying to find a balance in post-temple life, a way that Jews could continue being Jews through observance. I mean, there seems to be a kind of leniency in both the Masechet Nazir and Nedarim, but I think what you show us today, that the two sides, the two questions are not resolved, is that the rabbis said, well, we have to be more lenient, but only within reason or within limits. Those limits are undefined. So we have to look at it just the way you did today, each and every time, because you can't just have blanket statements when people are trying to figure out how to live in a new world. Question mark?
Yeah, I like that. And actually, that's embedded in my training as a rabbi, right? There are the laws on the books, but there's a reason why when you're stuck in some situation, you go and ask your rabbi, because there are all kinds of extenuating circumstances or the particular context of your question and your situation that the books can't deal with because it's too many cases. But right, a living rabbi who knows you can. And part of what rabbis try to weigh is right, the rules on the books and the needs of the moment. And sometimes those line up and sometimes those pull in different directions. And, there are tough choices to make. But hey, that's why we need rabbis. So if you're looking for a meaningful spiritual life and professional career, come be a rabbi and, you get to help people work through those things.
And
Carol, thank you for that comment.
And arguably, that's why the Talmud is written the way it is. It's training legal minds, not giving answers. Right.
The Talmud especially isn't trying to, sometimes it tells us what to do, but sometimes it tells us, hey, in any good situation, there are four possibilities and you got to think it through.
Yeah. And different ways of thinking through ideas. Sure.
Yeah, Oh, rabbis and PhDs in Judaica, said Laura. Yeah, we don't want to, I didn't mean only the rabbis, right?
We don't,
in the Zoom.
PhDs in Judaica don't rule on halacha.
But you have one to contribute. There you go. Thanks for that.
We send newsletters and run Zoom sessions.
Yeah. All right. Take care, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg. Thanks for a nice conversation. Good to see you all. And we will see you in your inbox tomorrow and in this space next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.